The courtroom was silent. The air was thick with tension. Everyone's eyes were locked on the man standing tall in his police uniform, Officer Grant Turner. He pointed at the woman sitting calmly at the defendant's table. "I saw her break into that store with my own eyes," he declared, his voice echoing through the room. "She had a crowbar. She pried the door open and ran out with a bag of stolen goods. That's her, Your Honor. I swear on my badge." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge narrowed his eyes at the woman in the defendant's chair. Her face remained still, unreadable. Dressed in a simple white blouse and navy blue pants, she looked like any regular citizen. But inside, she was a storm waiting to be unleashed. The prosecutor smirked, sensing victory. "Your Honor, it's clear as day. A respected officer of the law witnessed her committing the crime. What more do we need?" The judge turned to the woman. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Ms. Rebecca Cole?" Rebecca slowly rose from her seat. She smoothed her shirt, her calmness unsettling. Then, she took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. "Your Honor," she said coolly, "Officer Turner has just made a terrible mistake. He's lying under oath, and he doesn't even realize that I am a high-ranking Navy SEAL." Silence. A courtroom full of whispers and stunned faces. The officer's face turned pale. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order. Order in the court." Rebecca's sharp gaze locked onto Officer Turner. "Now," she said, her voice as calm as a steady sea, "should we start from the beginning?" It had started as a regular day for Rebecca. She had been walking home from the gym, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, when she saw a young boy sitting on the curb outside a small convenience store. He was about 10 years old, his clothes slightly torn, his face pale. Rebecca, being the person she was, couldn't just walk past. She crouched beside him. "You okay, buddy?" she asked gently. The boy hesitated, looking down at his hands. I lost my money," he whispered. Rebecca glanced at the store. Through the window, she could see a cashier watching them suspiciously. The boy had probably tried to explain himself, but people weren't always kind. She smiled warmly. "You hungry?" The boy nodded shyly. "Come on," she said, standing up and holding out a hand. "Let's get you something to eat." Inside the store, Rebecca let him pick a sandwich, a bottle of milk, and an apple. She paid for everything, giving the boy a reassuring pat on the shoulder. But as she stepped outside, something unexpected happened. A police cruiser screeched to a halt. Officer Turner jumped out, his face set with purpose. "You. Stop right there." Rebecca frowned. "Excuse me?" Turner marched up, pulling out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering. Witnesses saw a woman matching your description breaking into this store earlier. You're coming with me." Rebecca's eyes darkened. "That's a mistake, officer." Turner didn't listen. In seconds, her hands were yanked behind her back, cold metal snapping around her wrists. The young boy looked up in shock. "She didn't do anything," he shouted. "She was helping me." Turner ignored him, pushing Rebecca toward the squad car. As she sat in the back seat, Rebecca's mind raced. This wasn't just a mistake. It was something more, and she was going to find out exactly what was going on. Little did Turner know, he had just arrested the wrong woman, and he was about to regret it. The courtroom was now electric with tension. The prosecutor had gone pale. A Navy SEAL," he stammered. Rebecca nodded, standing tall. "That's right. Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Cole, United States Navy SEAL. And Officer Turner is lying." Turner's mouth was dry. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Rebecca took a slow step toward the stand. "Your Honor, I request permission to present evidence that will prove my innocence and expose Officer Turner for what he truly is." The judge studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Proceed." Rebecca reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "What Officer Turner didn't know is that I had my body cam running the entire time, and it recorded everything." Turner's face turned ghostly white. The courtroom burst into murmurs. The judge banged his gavel again. "Silence," Play the footage. The prosecutor hesitated, then walked over to the clerk, who quickly connected the USB to a screen. The video began to play. There, on full display for the entire courtroom, was the truth. The footage showed Rebecca walking with the young boy, paying for his food, and speaking to him with kindness. It showed Officer Turner pulling up, barking accusations, and slapping handcuffs on her without reason. But then, something shocking appeared on the screen. Rebecca had suspected something was off from the beginning. But now, as the video played, the courtroom gasped. The footage caught something else. Something Turner had desperately wanted to keep hidden. A small, shadowy figure lurked behind the store just before Turner arrived. A man, wearing a police badge. Turner wasn't just lying. He was covering for someone. The judge leaned forward. "Pause that video," he ordered. The screen froze. The shadowy figure's badge gleamed under the streetlight. Rebecca folded her arms. "Your Honor, I believe we have more than just one liar in this courtroom." Turner's hands clenched into fists. And just like that, the entire case had flipped upside down. The judge exhaled sharply. "Officer Turner, you have a lot of explaining to do." Turner opened his mouth to defend himself, but Rebecca wasn't finished. She turned to face him, her voice deadly calm. "I knew something was wrong the moment you arrested me," she said. "You never asked for my side of the story. You never checked for evidence. You just wanted someone to take the fall. Why? Who are you protecting?" Turner stayed silent, his face tight with panic. The judge looked at him sternly. "Officer, I strongly suggest you answer the question." A long silence. Then, suddenly, bam! The doors to the courtroom burst open. A group of men in dark suits stormed in, their eyes scanning the room. One of them, a bald man with a cold expression, locked eyes with Turner. And then, the officer did something no one expected. He bolted. Shoving past the prosecutor, Turner sprinted for the exit. Chaos erupted. Rebecca's instincts kicked in. With the speed of a trained warrior, she spun on her heels and took off after him. People screamed. The judge shouted for order. But nothing could stop what was coming next. Because Rebecca Cole was not going to let him escape. And when she caught him, she was going to get answers. Turner bolted through the courtroom doors, his breath ragged, his boots pounding against the marble floors. The hallway outside was empty, perfect for a clean escape. He wasn't thinking. He was running. But Rebecca Cole was faster. Within seconds, she was after him, her Navy SEAL instincts kicking in like a second nature. She didn't hesitate. She didn't stop to think. She moved. The moment Turner turned a corner, she pushed off the ground, gaining momentum. The people in the courtroom were yelling, but their voices faded behind her. Turner reached for the emergency exit, his hand slamming against the door handle. Too late. Rebecca lunged. With one fluid motion, she tackled him. Turner hit the floor hard, the impact forcing the air from his lungs. He groaned, trying to push up, but Rebecca was already on him, flipping him onto his stomach. She pinned him down, her knee pressing against his back. "You're not going anywhere," she hissed. Turner thrashed, but Rebecca barely needed effort to keep him in place. "Get off me," he growled, struggling. She leaned in close, her voice calm but deadly. "You're a disgrace to your badge, Turner." The courtroom doors burst open. The bailiffs and officers stormed in, their weapons drawn. "Stand down. Hands where we can see them." Rebecca raised her hands slowly. "He's all yours." The officers wasted no time. They grabbed Turner, yanking him up roughly before slamming him against the wall to cuff him. He didn't fight back now. He was caught, and he knew it. One of the officers, a gruff-looking sergeant, turned to Rebecca. "You all right?" She nodded, dusting off her pants. "Never better." Turner, panting, turned his head slightly. "You." Rebecca narrowed her eyes. "I what? You didn't expect to get caught?" Turner's face twisted in anger. But there was something else in his eyes too, fear. And Rebecca knew why. He wasn't afraid of getting arrested. He was afraid of the people he was covering for. The judge and lawyers flooded into the hallway, their faces stunned. The entire courtroom had just witnessed a police officer running from his own trial. The judge shook his head. Unbelievable. Rebecca crossed her arms. Your Honor, I believe Officer Turner's actions speak for themselves. The judge sighed. Take him to holding. We'll sort this out. The officers dragged Turner away, his feet barely touching the ground. Rebecca watched as they disappeared around the corner. This wasn't over. Not even close. 2 hours later, Rebecca sat in an interrogation room at the precinct. She wasn't the one being questioned. She was the one asking questions. Turner sat across from her, his hands cuffed to the table. His once proud uniform was wrinkled, his face sweaty. He looked exhausted. Rebecca tapped her fingers against the metal table. Let's skip the part where you pretend you don't know what's going on. Turner glared at her. You're full of it. Rebecca tilted her head. Am I? Because you ran. You ran like a guilty man, Turner. Silence. You weren't covering for yourself, she continued. You were covering for someone else. Turner clenched his jaw. Rebecca leaned forward. Who was that man outside the store? The one with the badge? No response. She smiled slightly. You know, there's something funny about cowards. They always think staying quiet will save them. But silence won't protect you, Turner. Silence won't stop whoever you're afraid of from coming after you. Turner's eyes twitched. Rebecca could see it now. He was breaking. You're afraid, aren't you? She said softly. You think they'll get to you before the law does. Turner swallowed hard. His breathing was heavier now. Rebecca sat back. But here's the thing. You ran in front of a courtroom full of people. You're in the system now. You're on the news. You can't hide anymore. So, your best chance at survival is telling me the truth. Turner exhaled slowly. His hands curled into fists. Then, I didn't have a choice, he muttered. Rebecca's eyes flickered with interest. No choice. Turner shook his head. They made me do it. Rebecca leaned in again. Who? Turner hesitated. His eyes darted toward the one-way mirror, as if someone was watching. Rebecca followed his gaze. You think they're watching you right now? Turner's throat bobbed. Rebecca studied him for a moment, then decided to push. You don't have much time, Turner. Tell me who they are. Turner looked down at the table. Then, finally, in a whisper, the Black Vipers. Rebecca's heart slowed. She had heard that name before, and it wasn't good. The Black Vipers weren't just some street gang. They were a network, a dark, underground syndicate operating beneath the surface of the city. Drugs, corruption, money laundering, and worst of all, they had people inside law enforcement. Rebecca's stomach tightened. How deep does it go? She asked. Turner sighed, defeated. Deeper than you think. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. How did you get involved? Turner's hands trembled. They own me. Rebecca frowned. How? Turner's voice cracked. They found out about my brother. He got in trouble with them. He owed them money. They said if I didn't help them, they'd kill him. Rebecca felt a pang of something unexpected. Pity. Turner was a liar, a coward, a dirty cop, but he had been trapped. And that meant there were people above him, people bigger than him. Rebecca took a deep breath. Where do I find them? Turner hesitated. Rebecca's gaze hardened. Turner, you are done? You ran from a courtroom. You're going to prison. The only way you have a shot at cutting a deal is if you tell me what I need to know. Turner squeezed his eyes shut. Then, finally, they meet at the old shipyard. Pier 19. Friday night. Midnight. Rebecca memorized it instantly. Turner looked up, his face hollow. If you go there, you won't come back. Rebecca smiled. They should be worried about me. Later that night, Rebecca sat in her car, staring out at the dark waters of the harbor. The Black Vipers. She had heard whispers of them before, even during her time overseas. They weren't just criminals. They were professionals. Untouchable. And now, she was going straight into their den. Alone. She knew she should call for backup. Get the authorities involved. But something inside her told her that wouldn't work. The Vipers had people inside law enforcement. The moment a raid was planned, they'd disappear. No. This had to be done in the shadows. Rebecca closed her eyes, breathing in the night air. This was what she had trained for. She wasn't just going to expose them. She was going to end them. And when Friday night came, the Black Vipers wouldn't know what hit them. The night was cold, the air thick with the scent of salt and rust. The shipyard at Pier 19 stretched before Rebecca like a maze of shadows and steel, towering cranes standing like skeletons against the moonlit sky. The distant creaks of ships settling in the water mixed with the occasional sound of rats scurrying through the crates stacked high across the pier. Rebecca crouched behind a rusted container, her black, tactical gear blending seamlessly into the darkness. She had no backup, no safety net, just her instincts, her training, and the burning need to uncover the truth. She had spent the past 2 days preparing, studying blueprints, tracking movements, and piecing together everything Turner had revealed. The Black Vipers were not just a gang. They were an operation, a business that thrived in the silence of the city's blind spots. And tonight, she was walking straight into their lair. She checked her watch. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes until the meeting. A single truck sat parked near the loading dock, its back doors open. A few men stood nearby, their voices low as they exchanged words she couldn't quite make out. Each one carried a weapon. Pistols, rifles, some even had knives strapped to their belts. They weren't just street thugs. They were professionals. Rebecca's eyes darted toward the warehouse nearby. The windows were grimy, but she could make out movement inside. More men, more weapons. This wasn't just a meeting. This was an arms deal. Her heart pounded, but her breath remained steady. Patience. Observe. Strike when they least expect it. She had no intention of taking them all on at once. She needed information first. Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness. A black SUV rolled onto the pier, its tires crunching against the gravel. The vehicle came to a stop, and 2 men stepped out. Rebecca's stomach tightened. The first man was tall, built like a tank, with a scar running down the side of his face. The other was thinner, older, but there was something about him. Something sharp, calculating. And then she saw it. A badge clipped to his belt. Her blood ran cold. A cop. Turner had said the corruption ran deep, but she hadn't expected to see it so plainly. The scarred man spoke first. "You got the shipment?" One of the men near the truck nodded. "Inside. Everything's accounted for." The older man, the cop, adjusted his coat. "Then let's get this done. We don't need eyes on us longer than necessary." Rebecca's mind raced. This was bigger than she thought. A corrupt officer dealing weapons to criminals. How far did this go? How many more were involved? She had to get closer. She moved swiftly, creeping along the edge of the containers. Every step was precise, soundless. And then, her foot hit something metal. A loose wrench. The clink echoed through the still night. Immediately, one of the guards turned. What was that? Rebecca flattened herself against the container, her heartbeat steady. The guard took a step forward, scanning the darkness. She had 2 choices. Stay hidden and risk them searching the area, or take him out silently. There was no choice, really. She moved. Before the guard could react, Rebecca sprang forward, grabbing him in a chokehold. He struggled, his hands clawing at her arms, but she was stronger, more trained. Within seconds, his body went limp. She eased him down onto the ground, out of sight. But now the others were on alert. "Hey, where's Mason?" one of them asked. She had seconds before they realized he was missing. Rebecca pressed herself into the shadows, watching as the men tensed. The scarred leader scowled. "Spread out. Find him." The men fanned out. Time to move. Rebecca slipped toward the SUV. The door was slightly open. With a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, she reached inside and grabbed what she needed. A phone. A burner. Cheap, untraceable. But it might have something useful inside. As she backed away, she heard footsteps behind her. Too close. She turned, just in time to see a fist swinging toward her. Rebecca dodged, but the man recovered quickly, lunging at her. No time for silence now. She caught his arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him into the SUV with a thud. His breath left his body in a pained grunt, but before he could make a sound, she knocked him out cold. A second later, she heard shouting. They knew she was here. Get her. The pier exploded into chaos. Men pulled weapons, flashlights flickering as they searched the dark. Rebecca took off, weaving between the containers, using the cover to her advantage. A gunshot rang out, hitting the crate just inches from her head. They were shooting to kill. She needed a way out. Fast. Then she saw it. A stack of shipping containers leading up to the warehouse roof. A way up. She sprinted toward it, bullets hitting the metal around her. Her muscles burned as she climbed, pulling herself up in record time. She reached the top and flattened herself against the rooftop. Below, the men were searching, their voices barking orders. But she wasn't worried about them. She was focused on one thing, the phone in her hand. She unlocked it, scanning through messages. Then she saw it. A name. Her stomach dropped. Captain Harris. The police captain. The man in charge. Rebecca clenched her jaw. This wasn't just a dirty cop selling weapons. The entire department was in on it. And now, they knew someone was after them. A chill ran down her spine. She wasn't just dealing with criminals anymore. She was dealing with an entire system designed to keep the truth buried. The Black Vipers weren't just a gang. They were the law. Rebecca exhaled, her grip tightening on the phone. This just got a whole lot bigger. And she was in more danger than ever. Rebecca's heartbeat pounded in her ears as she crouched on the warehouse rooftop, gripping the stolen burner phone tightly. Captain Harris. A name she never expected to see. A name that changed everything. She scanned the pier below. The men were spreading out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They had lost sight of her, but not for long. If she didn't move fast, she'd be trapped. She took a deep breath, adjusting her position. Think. Stay ahead. Stay in control. Her eyes darted to the far side of the shipyard. A rusted ladder led down to a row of old shipping containers. If she could make it there, she could slip into the water unnoticed. But first, she needed a distraction. She pulled a small device from her belt, a tactical flash grenade. No explosion, just a burst of light and sound. Enough to blind them for a few seconds. Just enough time. She pulled the pin and tossed it into the group of men below. A second later, boom. A blinding white light erupted, followed by a deafening screech. The men yelled in confusion, shielding their eyes, weapons swinging wildly. Rebecca didn't wait. She sprinted across the rooftop and leaped. She landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Ignoring the sting in her shoulder, she scrambled up and ran. Gunfire erupted behind her, bullets ricocheting off the metal containers. Almost there. She reached the ladder, sliding down in seconds. As soon as her boots hit the ground, she darted between the containers, her body moving on instinct. Her only chance now was the water. She reached the edge of the pier, looking down. The waves crashed against the wooden posts, dark and unwelcoming. It wasn't an easy jump, but it was her only option. A voice behind her shouted, "There she is!" No more time to think. She jumped. Cold water engulfed her, swallowing her whole. The shock hit her like a brick, but she forced herself to stay calm. Stay low. Stay quiet. Move with the current. She surfaced just enough to breathe, keeping her head barely above the waves. The men on the pier were shouting, flashing their lights across the water. Find her. She's got to be down there. Rebecca took a deep breath and went under again, letting the tide carry her away. She didn't stop moving until the lights disappeared behind her. By the time Rebecca pulled herself onto a hidden dock a mile away, her body was frozen and aching. She dragged herself onto the wooden planks, coughing up seawater. She lay there for a moment, catching her breath. She had the phone. She had the name. But now, she had a bigger problem. She was officially being hunted. Rebecca sat up, forcing her shaking hands to steady. She needed to move. Staying in one place was a death sentence. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket, praying it still worked. The screen flickered, but it powered on. She scrolled through messages, her eyes narrowing at the conversations. One message stood out. Shipment cleared. CH approved. Make sure Turner plays his part. Her blood boiled. Captain Harris had ordered this. Turner was just another pawn. And if Harris knew someone had his phone, Rebecca's stomach twisted. He would come for her. An hour later, Rebecca sat in the dimly lit booth of a rundown diner on the outskirts of town. The place smelled of burnt coffee and stale grease. It was perfect. She had changed into a dry hoodie and jeans she had stashed in a safe house nearby. Her hair was pulled back, her posture relaxed. To anyone watching, she was just another tired traveler grabbing a late-night meal. But her mind was racing. She needed to figure out her next move. She had enough evidence to expose Harris, but going to the police was out of the question. Who could she trust? She tapped the phone against the table, thinking. Then, a thought hit her. There was one person, Ethan Hayes, a former FBI agent, one of the few honest men left in law enforcement. He had left the bureau after getting too close to exposing corruption. Now, he worked under the radar, helping people who had nowhere else to turn. Rebecca pulled out her real phone and dialed his number. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. Rebecca? It's me, she said quietly. I need your help. Silence. Then, where are you? She glanced around the diner. Someplace safe. For now. What's going on? Rebecca exhaled. I have proof. Real proof. A police captain is running weapons for the Black Vipers. And I just stole his burner phone. Ethan cursed under his breath. You do realize you just painted a target on your back, right? I know. A pause. Then, all right. Meet me at the old train yard in 2 hours. We'll talk there. Rebecca nodded. See you soon. She hung up and slipped the phone into her pocket. But as she reached for her coffee, she felt it. A shift in the air. The hairs on her neck stood up. Someone was watching her. She slowly reached into her hoodie pocket, gripping the small knife she always carried. Then, without turning her head, she looked into the reflection of the diner's window. A man sat in the far corner, pretending to drink coffee. But his eyes were locked onto her. And he wasn't alone. Another man, sitting near the entrance. A third, standing by the jukebox. Her pulse quickened. They had found her. She took a slow breath. Don't panic. Don't run. Think. She needed to get out. She glanced at the back door near the kitchen. Her best shot. She grabbed her coffee and stood up, stretching like she was just heading to the restroom. The men didn't move. Not yet. She walked casually past the counter, then toward the back hallway. 5 steps. 10. She reached the door and pushed it open, and came face to face with a man standing outside. A large man. Armed. Going somewhere? He sneered. Rebecca's stomach tightened. She had walked right into a trap. And now, she had to fight her way out. Rebecca's eyes flicked between the man blocking the back exit and the 3 inside the diner. She was surrounded. The man at the door was massive, broad shoulders, thick arms, and a smirk that said he was enjoying this. The dim alley behind him was empty, no witnesses in sight. She could feel the others moving inside. They were waiting, watching. If she made a wrong move, they'd close in fast. But Rebecca didn't do wrong moves. She exhaled slowly, her hands still gripping the coffee cup. Use what you have. Distract. Disable. Escape. She moved. Fast. She threw the scalding coffee straight into the man's face. He screamed as the burning liquid hit his eyes. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She stepped in, driving her elbow into his throat. He gasped, stumbling backward. She didn't give him time to recover. A sharp kick to the knee sent him crashing to the ground. But she wasn't safe yet. The men inside had seen enough. Get her. The scrape of chairs and heavy boots thundered across the floor. Rebecca spun and dashed into the alley, sprinting into the night. Footsteps pounded behind her. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking against the brick walls. She ducked, twisting through the maze of dumpsters and crates, her body moving on pure instinct. Think ahead. Where's the escape? The alley opened into a main street, traffic still moving. She spotted a motorcycle parked outside a bar. Perfect. She sprinted toward it, her hands already reaching into her pocket. A thin metal pick slid into her fingers. She reached the bike, jammed the pick into the ignition, and twisted. The engine roared to life. The men burst out of the alley, guns raised. Rebecca didn't look back. She gunned the throttle, tires screeching against the pavement as she tore into the night. 30 minutes later, she pulled into an abandoned train yard, the wind still whipping through her hair. She killed the engine, stepping off the bike, scanning her surroundings. Rusted rail cars stood motionless on the tracks, their faded paint peeling under the dim glow of the city lights. A figure leaned against a rusted locomotive. Ethan Hayes. Tall, lean, and sharp-eyed. He still carried himself like the FBI agent he once was. Even in the dark, his gaze was alert, scanning the shadows like a man who had been in too many firefights. Rebecca walked up, tossing the burner phone into his hands. "Captain Harris," she said simply. Ethan's expression darkened as he scrolled through the messages. "Damn," he muttered. "I always knew Harris was dirty, but this is next level." Rebecca folded her arms. "They've already tried to kill me twice. This won't stop." Ethan nodded. "We need to hit back. Hard." Rebecca looked at him. "We?" Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "I left the bureau because of men like Harris. If I can take him down, I'm all in." Rebecca studied him. He was serious. Good. Because she had a plan. "We can't go straight to internal affairs," she said. "Harris has too many friends in high places. If we hand this over the wrong way, it disappears." Ethan nodded. "So what's the play?" Rebecca's lips curled into a grim smile. "We bring the fight to them." The next night, Rebecca and Ethan stood outside an upscale nightclub, one of the Black Viper's key meeting spots. Loud music pulsed from inside, and expensive cars lined the curb. The target? A man named Vincent Crow, one of Harris's top enforcers. He ran money, drugs, and weapons for the Vipers, and most importantly, he had dirt on Harris. They just needed to make him talk. Rebecca adjusted her leather jacket. "How much security?" Ethan glanced at the guards outside. 3 at the entrance. More inside. "Crow will have his own guys too." Rebecca smirked. "Sounds fun." Ethan sighed. "You always had a weird idea of fun." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked straight toward the entrance. The bouncers stiffened, hands moving toward their weapons. Rebecca stopped a few feet away. "I'm here to see Crow," she said coolly. One of the guards sneered. "Crow doesn't see strangers." Rebecca shrugged. "Tell him Rebecca Cole is here. If he wants to keep breathing, he'll talk to me." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. The name Rebecca Cole carried weight. One of them pulled out a radio, muttering into it. A few moments later, he gave a stiff nod. Inside. Alone. Rebecca felt Ethan tense behind her, but she shook her head. She had to do this alone. She stepped inside. The club was a neon jungle. Flashing lights, pounding bass, and crowds of people who had no idea that criminals were running the show. Crow sat in a private VIP booth at the back, his arm draped around a woman, a glass of whiskey in his other hand. He looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from amusement to caution. "Rebecca Cole," he mused. "Now, this is a surprise." She sat across from him, her movements slow, controlled. "We need to talk." Crow sipped his drink. "Do we?" She leaned in. "Harris is going down. And you're going down with him unless you start talking." Crow chuckled. "You really think you scare me?" Rebecca smirked. "No, but I bet the FBI files on you do." That got his attention. His fingers tightened around his glass. "I know everything," she continued. "The shipments, the payoffs, the bodies." She leaned closer, her voice razor sharp. "You help me take Harris down, or I make sure you take the fall instead." Crow hesitated. She could see the wheels turning in his head. Then, his expression hardened. "You don't get it, do you?" he whispered. "Harris isn't the top." Rebecca frowned. "What do you mean?" Crow exhaled. "You're thinking too small. Harris answers to someone else. Someone bigger." Rebecca's stomach twisted. "Who?" Before Crow could answer, Boom. The club exploded into chaos. Gunfire. Screams. Rebecca ducked as bullets tore through the walls, glass shattering everywhere. Ethan's voice crackled in her earpiece. It's an ambush. Get out of there. Rebecca turned, just in time to see men pouring into the club, guns drawn. They weren't just after her. They were cleaning house. Crow's eyes widened in horror. He reached for his gun. A single shot rang out. Crow's body slumped over. Rebecca barely had time to react before more bullets flew. The Black Vipers weren't just protecting Harris. They were eliminating loose ends. And now, they were coming for her. Gunfire ripped through the nightclub. Screams echoed as panicked civilians ducked and scrambled for cover. Rebecca's pulse pounded in her ears as she flipped the table over, using it as temporary cover. Crow was dead. His body slumped over the table, blood soaking through his shirt. His last words rang in her head. Harris isn't the top. There's someone bigger. Who? Rebecca didn't have time to think. Bullets tore through the booth, splintering the wood around her. She peeked over the edge. 5 armed men were closing in, their guns trained on her. Ethan's voice crackled in her earpiece. Rebecca, you need to move. No kidding. She reached for Crow's whiskey glass, grabbed it, and flung it hard at one of the shooters. It shattered against his face, buying her the split second she needed. She launched herself over the table, landing in a roll as more bullets whizzed past her. She darted through the club, weaving through the screaming crowd, using the chaos as cover. Her goal, get to the exit. But the Vipers were ready. 2 men blocked the front door, weapons raised. Another squad moved in from the side, funneling her toward the back. She had no choice. She sprinted toward the DJ booth, grabbed a speaker stand, and slammed it into the club's main power switch. The entire club went dark. Panic erupted. People shoved past one another, desperate to escape. The shooters cursed, blinded by the sudden blackout. But Rebecca? She thrived in the dark. Moving with precision, she slipped past the guards at the front, pressing herself against the wall. One of them turned, scanning the room, his gun swinging blindly. Big mistake. Rebecca grabbed his wrist, twisted, and snapped his arm. He howled in pain as his gun clattered to the ground. Before he could scream, she elbowed him in the throat, knocking him unconscious. The other guard turned too late. Rebecca grabbed his gun, jammed it under his chin, and whispered, "Drop it." His eyes widened. He let his weapon clatter to the floor. She spun him around, using him as a human shield. The remaining gunman hesitated. "You want to shoot me?" she taunted. "Go ahead. But you'll have to go through your friend here." No one fired. Smart choice. The second they hesitated, she shoved the guard forward and made a break for the exit. She burst through the club's doors and into the alley, lungs burning. Ethan's SUV screeched to a stop, the passenger door flying open. "Get in," he yelled. Rebecca dove inside just as gunfire exploded behind her. Ethan slammed the gas pedal, and the SUV roared forward. Bullets chased them down the street, shattering the back window. Rebecca exhaled, gripping the dashboard. "Well, that went great." Ethan shot her a look. "Crow's dead, and now they know we're after them." Rebecca wiped blood off her lip. "Yeah, like I said, great." Ethan sighed. "Did he give you anything before they took him out?" Rebecca hesitated. "Just that Harris isn't the top." Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Then who is?" Rebecca looked out the window, watching the city blur past. That was the million-dollar question, and she needed answers, fast. An hour later, they pulled into a safe house, a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Ethan killed the engine. "We can't stay long. If Harris knows we took out some of his guys, he'll send everything he is after us." Rebecca nodded. "I need to dig into Harris's records. See if I can find a connection to whoever's really in charge." Ethan tossed her a laptop from the back seat. "Already ahead of you." They hurried inside the room, locking the door behind them. The motel was quiet. No cameras, no witnesses. Rebecca opened the laptop and got to work. If Harris wasn't the top, then who was pulling the strings? She hacked into Harris's police records, scanning financial transactions, case files, and personal contacts. Then, she found it. A wire transfer. $2 million. Deposited into a secret offshore account. The sender? Senator Richard Kane. Rebecca's blood ran cold. A U.S. senator was funding the Black Vipers. Ethan peered over her shoulder. Tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing. Rebecca swallowed hard. Oh, you're seeing it. Harris wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was working for a politician. Ethan cursed. That explains why no one ever touches the Vipers. They've got government protection. Rebecca clenched her fists. Not for long. She stared at the screen. Kane's bank records showed dozens of transactions, bribes, payoffs, funding for criminal operations. If they could expose this, it would bring down everyone. But before she could dig further, the motel's power cut out. The laptop screen flickered and died. Rebecca froze. Ethan's hand went to his gun. They found us. The sound of car doors slamming shut echoed outside. Footsteps. Then, bang, bang, bang. The motel door shook as someone pounded on it. Rebecca and Ethan locked eyes. No words were needed. They grabbed their weapons, ducked behind cover, and braced for the fight of their lives. This wasn't just a gang war anymore. This was war against the system, and they weren't going down without a fight. The pounding on the motel door grew louder. A voice snarled from the other side. Rebecca Cole, we know you're in there. Open up, and we might let you live. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Ethan. His jaw was tight, gun already drawn. They brought backup, he muttered. Rebecca listened carefully. At least 6 men outside. Maybe more. Heavy boots stomped against the gravel. Engines rumbled nearby. They weren't just here to kill. They were here to erase. Rebecca gripped her pistol. They wouldn't get that chance. The pounding stopped. The door exploded inward, with splintering as the men stormed in. Rebecca moved first. She dropped low, squeezing off 2 precise shots. Pop, pop. The first man crumpled, his body slamming into the nightstand. Ethan fired next. 1 shot, 1 kill. A second attacker collapsed against the doorway. The remaining men fired back. Bullets shredded the motel walls, the cheap wallpaper peeling as wood and dust exploded into the air. Rebecca ducked behind the bed, reloading. This place won't hold. Ethan shouted over the gunfire. He was right. The motel was a death trap. Rebecca's eyes darted toward the bathroom window. Their only escape. Cover me, she ordered. Ethan unleashed a burst of fire, forcing the attackers to duck. Rebecca sprinted toward the window, smashed the glass with her elbow, and kicked out the remaining shards. We're moving, she shouted. Ethan backed toward her, firing off 2 more shots. Click. His gun ran dry. Now. Rebecca grabbed him and hauled them both through the window. They crashed onto the gravel outside. Ethan groaned but was already moving. Headlights blinded them. 3 black SUVs parked nearby. Armed men were spreading out, ready to flank them. No time to think. Rebecca grabbed Ethan's wrist and ran. Gunfire chased them. Bullets sparked against the pavement as they sprinted toward the tree line behind the motel. If they could reach the woods, they could disappear. But the Vipers weren't letting them go that easy. Tires screeched. One of the SUVs peeled forward, cutting off their escape. The driver jumped out, gun raised. Rebecca didn't slow down. She leaped, grabbing the gunman's arm before he could fire. A sharp twist, his wrist snapped. The gun dropped. She slammed her knee into his chest, sending him crashing into the hood of the SUV. Ethan grabbed the fallen gun and fired twice. The other men hesitated. It was all they needed. Rebecca and Ethan dived into the SUV, slamming the doors shut. Drive, Ethan yelled. Rebecca threw the vehicle into gear. Tires squealed as she floored the gas, barreling straight through the blockade. The Vipers opened fire, bullets shattering the rear windshield. But it was too late. Rebecca gunned the engine, disappearing into the night. 20 minutes later, they parked on a deserted back road, the engine still ticking from the high-speed chase. Ethan wiped blood off his forehead. That was close. Rebecca didn't respond. She was gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. They were waiting for us, she finally said. Ethan nodded. Yeah, and they knew exactly where we were. Rebecca's stomach twisted. That means someone tipped them off. Ethan sighed. And there's only one person who knew our location. They locked eyes. Turner. Rebecca clenched her jaw. That coward. He sold us out. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. He's desperate. Probably trying to buy his way back into the Viper's good graces. Rebecca grabbed her phone, scanning the burner messages again. Her eyes narrowed. A new message had appeared on the device. It was from an unknown number. Meet me at the old train station. Midnight. I can give you what you want, but come alone. Rebecca and Ethan stared at the screen. Ethan frowned. Captain Harris? Rebecca's mind raced. Why would Harris want to meet? He had just sent men to kill them. Unless... He was afraid. Ethan leaned back. It's a trap. Rebecca nodded. Obviously. He studied her. But you're going anyway. She locked eyes with him. Of course I am. Ethan sighed. You really don't believe in easy nights, do you? Rebecca smirked. Not my style. She checked her watch. 11:20 p.m. 40 minutes until the meeting. Whatever was waiting at that train station, it would end one of two ways. Either Harris talked, or he died. And Rebecca? She wasn't planning to lose. The old train station loomed in the moonlight like a forgotten relic. Rusted tracks stretched into the darkness, weeds creeping between the rails. The platform was abandoned, the overhead lights flickering weakly. Rebecca arrived early. Never walk into a trap without scouting first. She parked her stolen SUV a block away and made her way in on foot. Every movement was calculated, every breath controlled. Her instincts screamed at her. Something wasn't right. She crouched behind a crumbling pillar, scanning the area. No guards. No backup. No signs of an ambush. It was too quiet. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows. Captain Harris. He looked rough. His uniform wrinkled. His face gaunt. His usual arrogance was gone. Instead, his eyes darted around nervously, his fingers twitching at his sides. Rebecca's grip tightened on her pistol, hidden beneath her jacket. She stepped forward. You wanted to talk? Harris flinched at the sound of her voice. He turned, exhaling sharply. Cole. Rebecca studied him. You don't look so good, Captain. He ran a hand through his graying hair. Yeah, well, I made some bad choices. Rebecca scoffed. Bad choices? You've been running a criminal empire from inside the police force. Harris sighed. It's bigger than that. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Bigger than you? Harris nodded. Much bigger. She folded her arms. Then start talking. Harris hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, The Vipers. They're just the muscle. The real power? It's in the government. Rebecca tensed. Who? Harris swallowed hard. Senator Kane. Rebecca already knew that, but she let him continue. Harris's voice dropped to a whisper. Kane funds everything. The weapons, the drugs, the cover-ups. He owns half the city's law enforcement. Even the mayor takes orders from him. Rebecca's blood ran cold. She knew Kane was involved. But this was an entire system. Harris stepped closer. You don't get it, Cole. You can't stop him. You go after Kane, and you're dead. Simple as that. Rebecca smirked. If you believed that, you wouldn't have called me. Harris rubbed his face. I don't want to die, Cole. I thought I could handle it. But now? Kane's cleaning house. Crow's dead. Turner's next. And me. His voice shook. I won't make it through the week. Rebecca's jaw tightened. Kane was tying up loose ends. And Harris was a loose end. Rebecca pulled out the burner phone. Why tell me this? What do you want? Harris exhaled. A deal. I give you everything. Account numbers, wire transfers, names. You get me out of this mess. Rebecca stared at him. You think I'm in a position to offer you protection? Harris nodded desperately. You know people. FBI, military contacts. I need out. Rebecca considered her options. Harris was scum. A dirty cop who had ruined lives. He deserved to rot. But if he had the evidence, she could take down everyone. She took a slow step forward. Fine. Give me the files. Harris swallowed. They're on a hard drive. My house. Hidden in a safe. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Then let's go get it. Harris hesitated. It's not that simple. Kane's men are watching me. If I show up there, I'm dead. Rebecca smirked. That's why you're not going alone. 30 minutes later, Rebecca and Harris pulled up outside his house. The two-story suburban home looked normal, too normal. The porch light was on, a car parked in the driveway. But Rebecca wasn't fooled. She scanned the area. How many? Harris gulped. At least 4. Maybe more. Rebecca nodded. Stay here. She slipped out of the car, moving fast and silent. She circled to the back, staying low. The house had security cameras. But Harris had been careful. There was a blind spot. She climbed onto the porch and picked the back door lock in seconds. Click. She eased the door open. Inside, the house was dark, quiet, but she wasn't alone. A shadow moved near the stairs. Rebecca froze. The man was armed, watching the front windows. She moved like a ghost. Silent, calculated, deadly. She stepped behind him, wrapped an arm around his neck, and squeezed. He struggled, gasped. Then, his body slumped. She eased him down and moved forward. Harris's office was upstairs. The safe was inside the wall behind a bookshelf. She climbed the stairs, every step careful. As she reached the top, a voice called out, "You think we wouldn't be waiting for you?" Rebecca spun. Too late. A figure emerged from the dark, gun trained on her. A second man appeared at the end of the hall. Harris's house was a trap. Rebecca exhaled slowly. Think. React. Survive. The first man stepped closer. Drop the gun. Rebecca held her hands up. Then, she moved. She ducked, grabbing the first man's wrist and twisting. His gun went off, the shot shattering a picture frame. She drove her knee into his stomach, then wrenched his gun away, firing twice. The second man dropped. The first staggered back, reaching for a knife. Rebecca slammed his head into the wall. Silence. She grabbed the gun and rushed into Harris's office. She yanked the bookshelf aside, revealing the hidden safe. Harris had given her the code. 3-7-4-9. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, a hard drive. Rebecca snatched it and turned to leave. Just as another figure stepped into the doorway, she froze. The man smiled. Tall, well-dressed, cold, intelligent eyes. Rebecca's stomach twisted. She recognized him immediately. Senator Richard Kane. He shook his head, smiling. I have to admit, Cole, I underestimated you. Rebecca tightened her grip on the gun. Kane didn't even flinch. You must realize by now, you won't leave here alive. Rebecca's mind raced. Kane wasn't supposed to be here. He had men for this kind of thing. So why come himself? Unless he wanted to see her die. Rebecca smirked. Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you. Kane chuckled. I like you, Cole. It's a shame. His hand moved. Rebecca fired first. But Kane was already moving. He ducked, firing back. The bullet grazed her shoulder. Pain exploded through her arm, but she ignored it. She fired again. Missing. Kane lunged, slamming into her. They crashed into the desk, the hard drive tumbling to the floor. Rebecca lashed out, elbowing Kane in the ribs. He grunted but swung back. She blocked, barely. Kane was stronger than he looked. But Rebecca was faster. She grabbed a desk lamp and smashed it into his head. Kane stumbled. Rebecca lunged for the hard drive. Just as more gunmen stormed the house. She had seconds to decide. Stay and fight, or run and live. Rebecca grabbed the drive and jumped through the window. Glass shattered as she tumbled onto the lawn. She hit the ground hard. Pain shot through her ribs, but she rolled to her feet. Ethan's SUV roared down the street. She sprinted toward it. Bullets whizzed past her as she leaped into the passenger seat. Ethan gunned the gas. Rebecca clutched the hard drive to her chest. Cain was alive, but so was she. And now, she had everything she needed to burn him to the ground. Rebecca pressed a hand to her bleeding shoulder, her breath ragged. The hard drive sat in her lap like a ticking time bomb. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he sped through the empty streets. "That was Cain," he said, his voice grim. "You went head-to-head with a sitting senator and lived." Rebecca smirked despite the pain. "He lived too. That's the part that bothers me." Ethan didn't slow down. "How bad is the shoulder?" Rebecca peeled back her jacket, wincing as the wound pulsed. "Just a graze." Ethan exhaled. "I swear you're made of steel." Rebecca ignored the pain, her fingers tracing the hard drive. "This thing, it has everything. Cain's transactions, his network, names of every dirty cop and politician in his pocket." Ethan glanced at her. "And now they'll kill to make sure it never sees the light of day." Rebecca knew that. She knew it the moment Cain looked her in the eyes and fired at her. He wasn't just another corrupt official. He was a predator. And now, she was the only thing standing between him and total power. Ethan turned onto a dirt road, heading toward an old, abandoned gas station. "Safe house?" Rebecca asked. Ethan nodded. "No cameras, no tech, just a place to lay low." He parked behind the crumbling building, killing the engine. The world fell into silence. They slipped inside, checking every corner. It was dark, musty, and cold. A single table stood in the middle, covered in dust. Rebecca sat down, plugging the hard drive into her laptop. Lines of code flashed across the screen. Ethan leaned over. "What are we looking at?" Rebecca's eyes scanned the files. Bank transactions, wire transfers, internal memos. Cain's got his hands in everything. Military contracts, law enforcement budgets, drug routes. Ethan frowned. "That's enough to take him down." Rebecca didn't respond. Her fingers kept scrolling until she found something that made her stomach drop. Project Ironclad. She clicked on it. A video popped up. Security footage. The timestamp read 2 years ago. The location? A military base. Rebecca's chest tightened as the video played. In the grainy footage, soldiers in tactical gear stormed a warehouse. Gunfire erupted. Smoke filled the air. Men fell, some in military uniforms, others in black masks. And then, Rebecca saw herself, her own face. She sucked in a sharp breath. Ethan's brow furrowed. "Is that you?" Rebecca's mind raced. She barely remembered this mission. It had been off the books. A black ops raid in South America. Her team had been sent in to take down an arms dealer suspected of working with terrorists. But in the video, things looked different. She watched as the camera panned, and Senator Cain stepped into view. Rebecca's stomach dropped. Cain had been there. Ethan leaned closer. "This mission, was it classified?" Rebecca nodded, her throat tight. "I was never told who was funding the arms dealer. We were just ordered to take him out." But now, watching this, Cain wasn't just some corrupt politician. He had been involved from the beginning. Ethan exhaled. This means Cain isn't just covering up crimes. He's been running them for years. Rebecca's pulse pounded. Cain had orchestrated everything. The weapons trade, the dirty cops, the black vipers. And now, he was erasing his past. She clenched her jaw. This isn't about just exposing him anymore. Ethan met her gaze. "Then what is it?" Rebecca closed the laptop, her eyes cold. "It's about ending him." The next morning, Cain sat in his private office, high above the city in a glass skyscraper. His phone buzzed. He answered, his voice calm. "Tell me." The man on the other end sounded nervous. "Cole got away. She has the drive." Cain's jaw tightened. "And you're telling me this instead of handling it?" A pause. Then, "She's moving fast. She won't stop until you're exposed." Cain exhaled. He turned to the window, staring down at the streets below. "She's a soldier," he murmured. "She fights with strategy, which means she'll be looking for an advantage." Another pause. "What do we do?" Cain smiled. "Simple." He turned, his eyes dark. "We take away everything she has left." 2 hours later, Rebecca and Ethan were still holed up in the safe house, reviewing every piece of data. Then, Rebecca's phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. Her gut told her not to answer. She picked up anyway. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. Rebecca Cole. She sat up straighter. Who is this? The voice chuckled. You've been busy. Rebecca's fingers tensed. If you have something to say it. Silence. Then, a second voice came through the line. Faint. Muffled. A woman's voice. Shaky. Rebecca? Rebecca's stomach dropped. It was her mother. She shot up from the chair. Mom? The first voice returned. We have her. Rebecca's breath caught. If you touch her. The voice laughed. You'll what? You have two choices, Cole. Hand over the hard drive. Or we put a bullet in her head. The call ended. Silence. Rebecca stood frozen, the phone still in her hand. Ethan looked at her. What happened? Rebecca turned, her eyes burning with fury. They took my mother. Ethan's face darkened. Then we get her back. Rebecca's fists clenched. No more hiding. No more running. She was ending this. She grabbed her gun, checked the magazine, and shoved it into her holster. Ethan followed suit. What's the plan? Rebecca's voice was ice cold. We go to war. Rebecca's mind was a storm. Her mother, the only family she had left, was now a hostage. Kane had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. Ethan gripped her shoulder. We'll get her back. Rebecca didn't answer. She was already moving, her mind racing through every possible scenario. She checked the call log. No number. No location. Kane was smart. He wasn't going to make this easy. Ethan was thinking too. They'll want to trade. The hard drive for your mom? Rebecca nodded. Which means they won't kill her. Not yet. She clenched her fists. But I'm not giving them the drive. Ethan smirked. Didn't think you would. Rebecca inhaled slowly. Calm. Focus. Plan. Kane was using her mother as leverage, so she would use him as leverage. She grabbed the laptop and reopened the files. Find something. Anything. A weakness. Ethan pulled up a chair. If Kane kidnapped your mom, he has her stashed somewhere safe. Somewhere secure. Rebecca's fingers flew across the keys. She pulled up real estate records, properties linked to Kane's shell companies. One stood out. An abandoned military warehouse. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. That's it. Ethan checked the satellite view. Remote. Guarded. Easy to defend. Rebecca grabbed her gear. We hit it hard and fast. Ethan hesitated. You sure you don't want to call in backup? Rebecca's voice was ice. This is personal. Night fell. Rebecca and Ethan arrived at the warehouse, concealed in the tree-line. The place was locked down tight. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, scanning the area. Ethan exhaled. We go in quiet? Rebecca shook her head. No time for quiet. She pulled out a C4 charge. Ethan chuckled. Now you're talking. They moved into position. Rebecca set the explosive against the back wall, wired the detonator, and took cover. She pressed the trigger. Boom. The explosion rocked the warehouse. Guards scattered, yelling orders. Rebecca and Ethan moved in. Two guards rushed toward the blast site. Rebecca dropped them with two precise shots. Another fired from a rooftop. Ethan took him out before he could blink. They cleared the outer perimeter in seconds. Then, Rebecca heard it. A woman's muffled scream. Her mother. She sprinted toward the sound, kicking open a side door. Inside, a dimly lit room. Her mother was bound to a chair, gagged. A man stood beside her, gun pressed to her temple. Rebecca froze. The man smirked. Took you long enough. Rebecca's voice was razor-sharp. Let her go. The man shrugged. You know how this works. The drive, or she dies. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She fired. One shot. Right between his eyes. The man collapsed. Rebecca rushed to her mother, tearing off the gag. Mom! Her mother's eyes filled with relief. Becca! She cut the ropes and pulled her into a tight hug. Ethan's voice crackled through her earpiece. We got a problem. Rebecca turned. More men were coming. Armed. Angry. Ready to kill. And leading them, Kane. Rebecca's blood went cold. The final showdown had arrived. Kane smiled. You've caused me a lot of trouble, Cole. Rebecca raised her gun. Kane shook his head. You won't kill me. Rebecca smirked. Want to bet? Gunfire erupted. The battle had begun. Gunfire erupted. Rebecca shoved her mother behind a stack of crates. Stay down, she ordered before spinning back toward the fight. Ethan was already moving, taking out 2 guards with clean headshots. But more were pouring in. At least a dozen men, heavily armed. And at the center of it all, Senator Richard Kane. He stood there, calm, composed, untouchable. The man was surrounded by chaos, but he didn't flinch. Rebecca reloaded her weapon and moved fast. She fired, hitting one attacker in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor. Ethan ducked behind cover. They're pushing in. Rebecca gritted her teeth. They were outnumbered. She grabbed a smoke grenade from her vest and hurled it toward the enemy. PSSSSHHH. Thick white smoke billowed through the room, clouding their vision. Kane's men hesitated. Rebecca and Ethan didn't. They moved like shadows, striking before the smoke cleared. Rebecca took down 2 more guards, silent, precise. Ethan covered her flank, dropping another. Then, a familiar click. Rebecca turned. Just as a gun barrel pressed against her temple, her stomach tightened. She had been too focused on the fight. Kane stood behind her, a cold smile on his face. His pistol was steady. You put up a hell of a fight, he said. But it ends here. Rebecca stared him down. No fear. No hesitation. You really think I came here without a plan, she said. Kane smirked. You don't have a way out of this. Rebecca's lips curled. Want to bet? Then, a single gunshot rang out. Kane's body jerked. His gun clattered to the floor. He stumbled, clutching his side, bleeding. Behind him, Rebecca's mother stood there, holding a pistol with trembling hands. Rebecca's breath caught. Mom. Her mother's hands shook, but she kept the gun aimed. He was going to kill you. Kane gasped, blood spilling between his fingers. His face twisted in rage. You think this changes anything? He snarled. Rebecca stepped forward, gun trained on him. It changes everything. She grabbed the hard drive from her pocket and tossed it to Ethan. Time to end this, she said. Ethan nodded and pulled out his phone. One call. To every major news station, every government agency, and every honest law enforcement officer left. The evidence was going public. Kane's reign was over. His empire was collapsing. Kane's lips curled in a snarl. You think you've won? He hissed. There are others. Bigger than me. They'll bury you. Rebecca stepped closer. Then I'll dig them up. She pulled the trigger. One final shot. Kane collapsed. Dead. Silence filled the room. Rebecca turned to her mother, who was shaking. It's over, Rebecca whispered, pulling her into a hug. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Damn, you actually did it. Rebecca smirked. Told you. The sirens wailed in the distance. The world was about to learn the truth. And Rebecca? She wasn't running anymore. She was ready for the next fight. The wail of sirens cut through the cold night air. Red and blue lights flashed against the steel walls of the warehouse, illuminating the chaos that had just unfolded. Rebecca stood still, gun still raised. Kane's lifeless body sprawled on the concrete floor. The once untouchable senator, the man who had orchestrated so much destruction, was finally gone. Ethan glanced at her. You okay? Rebecca exhaled slowly. I will be. The sound of screeching tires made them both turn. A fleet of FBI vehicles and unmarked police cars flooded the perimeter. This time, they weren't here to cover up the crime. They were here to clean up Kane's mess. A group of agents stormed the warehouse, weapons drawn. But as they saw Rebecca and Ethan standing over Kane's body, the tension shifted. One of the agents, Special Agent Claire Marshall, stepped forward. She looked from Rebecca to Ethan, then to the hard drive in his hands. Tell me you got what we need, she said. Ethan tossed her the device. Everything. Every account. Every name. Every dirty cop. Kane was just the face of it. Marshall caught the drive and nodded. Then we bring the rest of them down. Rebecca turned to her mother, helping her to her feet. You okay, Mom? Her mother nodded weakly, eyes still wide with shock. I never imagined you lived in a world like this. Rebecca's throat tightened. I never wanted you to. Marshall's radio crackled. We have full confirmation. The files have been uploaded. We're pulling in every name attached to this case. Rebecca smirked. Kane's entire empire is about to collapse. Marshall gave her a sharp look. You understand that when this hits the news, you're going to be a target? Rebecca shrugged. I already was. Marshall sighed. At least let us get you into protection. Rebecca shook her head. I don't run. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, I tried telling her that. Marshall exhaled. Then be careful. Because men like Kane don't just build empires alone. Rebecca's smirk faded. She knew that. Kane had hinted at something bigger. Something still out there. But that was a fight for another day. Tonight? She had one. The next morning, the news broke. Senator Richard Kane exposed in corruption scandal. Ties to crime syndicate confirmed. Dozens of high-ranking officials arrested following FBI raid. Black Viper's gang crushed. Major leaders taken into custody. Rebecca sat in a quiet diner, sipping coffee, watching the headlines roll in. Her name wasn't in the news. It never would be. That was fine. She didn't do this for credit. She did it because it was right. Ethan slid into the seat across from her. So, what now? Rebecca smirked. That's the question, isn't it? She looked out the window. The world kept moving, unaware of how close it had come to being swallowed by corruption. She wasn't finished. There were still more battles to fight. But for now, she took another sip of coffee, let out a deep breath, and allowed herself a moment of peace. For the first time in a long time, she was free.